friends, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Kate. We do mom life together here on this channel, and I'm all about living a faithful motherhood and a purposeful life, and we have an amazing community of mamas here. I would love for you to subscribe, hit that little red button and the bell beside it so you don't miss any videos. So today we're going to be doing a book review, and it's a foster care book, and this is the Replanted book by Jenn Ranter Hook, her husband Joshua Hook, and also Mike Berry from Confessions of an Adoptive Parent. This is the book that every foster parent of faith needs to read, or people considering foster care. Jenn does an amazing job in this book relating to foster parents, and she truly understands the support required and champions that on for foster parents. She really wants foster and adoptive parents to get the help that they need. I met Jenn at a conference last fall, and it's evident in everything that she does, in the event that she put on, that she's really passionate about foster parents, adoptive parents, and getting them the support they require. Her love for what she does is just so evident, and you can tell she pours her heart and soul into this book. The book is well thought out, well researched, and just tons of information for foster and adoptive parents. And one thing I love about this book is right away she opens it by saying that kids in care are often misunderstood, and they're not seen as the precious, worthy humans that they are. You know, that their personalities have developed with complex histories, which has shaped their current reality today. And I just love that right away she shifts that focus, because I think kids in care are so often misunderstood, their behaviors are misunderstood, and one of the most vital things about being a foster and adoptive parent is that you're trauma informed. And she really gets into that in this book, and how to be trauma informed and how to get the resources that you need. She shares in my firm belief that God places a high priority on vulnerable children who need caring for, and that as Christians we're called to be a part of that mission. I'm going to read something that just really spoke to my heart that she writes. Adoption and foster care connect with important values that are deeply integral to what it means to be a Christian. It is a beautiful expression of love. It involves caring and sacrifice for a child in need. It is a powerful expression of justice. It involves meeting the needs of vulnerable children and the least of these. And it is a wonderful expression of faithfulness. It involves sticking with a child for the long haul, whether that is permanently or temporarily, and through the inevitable ups and downs. Being willing to serve as an adoptive or foster parent involves becoming the hands and feet of Jesus to a child. She then gives tons of tangible advice and support for those of us who are responding to these trauma and special needs that are unique to children impacted by foster care and adoption. She understands that in this process we often feel alone, rejected, isolated, that we might question whether we should have become a foster or adoptive parent in the first place. And she writes about the hope that we have in these challenging and these difficult moments, that knowing and trusting that our Heavenly Father is holding on to us, and that God willingly steps into our mess. And hope is also found when we join others, which is why I'm so passionate about this community here on YouTube and all of the foster and adoptive mamas that I connect with, because of sharing my story and trying to encourage and help others that are doing the same thing. The heart of the Replanted book is for you to feel validated and supported right where you are, right in the thick of it, in the beauty and in the struggle. Jenn reminds us in this book that it is possible to enjoy a full, vibrant life as a foster and adoptive family, to learn new skills that help us improve our relationships with our kids and with our spouses, because that's a huge part of it, to gather a group of faithful people that can help us through the struggles, through the ups and downs, to have people that understand us and have our back no matter what. And to engage churches to be a community of people who actively care for vulnerable children and support those who are on the front line, who are fostering and who are adopting kids from hard places. Those are the goals she outlines in her book, and I think she does just that. So there's a couple awesome takeaways, things that I highlighted that I just wanted to share with you. But I highly recommend to go get the book. You can get it on Amazon or where most books are sold. I purchased mine on Amazon on my Kindle. That's why I don't have a physical copy to show you. But here's some of the takeaways that I got from the book. Don't wait until you're in the thick of it to get support. Start with support as soon as you start thinking and praying about the decision to become foster and adoptive parents. Enter into this journey with a strong dose of humility and awareness of our limitations and appropriate boundaries. Foster parents are not generally given the necessary training and education to bring their child to a place of healing. In other words, realize that there's so much more to this than what you learn in your 9-week PRIDE or MAP training. There's so much more to trauma-informed parenting that you need to know in order to be a good foster parent, to be a good adoptive parent. It's different than regular parenting. Another thing she says, we're often caring so intensely for our children, we forget to care for ourselves. Check, been there, done that. Parenthood's demands, particularly those of foster and adoptive parents, are so high that sometimes the task feels completely impossible. No matter what kind of parent you are, I'm sure you can relate to feelings like that. Motherhood is hard, parenting is hard, but we have the ability to implement strategies to make it less hard and to glorify God in our parenting and not just sit in the hard and complain about the hard, but to actively do something to make it better. Another thing she says that really hit home: when the demands of parenting outweigh the resources, the adjustment is difficult, and when the scales are tipped in this direction for too long, we start to see negative effects of stress, psychologically, physically, and relationally. And I've shared a video about the mental breakdown that I had shortly after becoming a foster parent because I was just doing too much. And physically, my body, mentally I thought I was fine and I could keep going, but eventually physically my body gave way to that stress. So just reading that just really hit home. Sorry, I should have said this in the beginning, but Jenn is a clinical psychologist and she worked with kids in care and their families and foster parents. So from there, she then started a ministry, the Replanted ministry, where she just supports and champions on foster and adoptive parents, and they have Replanted groups and they put on a conference every year, and it's just a really, really great ministry, and she does such an amazing job leading it. Oh, she says, a child who experiences abuse gets the message, I do not like you, and a child who experiences neglect receives the message, you do not exist. So when you can only imagine when your child has experienced those messages their whole life in the way that they were parented in their first family, when it comes to a child needing a new family or just allowing the time for that family to heal and to be able to parent safely, properly. But these are the messages that these children are receiving. And if you're just trying to parent a kid who knows they're loved and knows they're valued, like if you're trying to parent in the same way, you can see why it doesn't work, because this is where a lot of the behaviors stem from. They try to challenge you because they want to prove the message that they've been told their whole lives, that they're unloved, that they don't exist. So this is where a lot of the challenging behaviors come from, because of what they think about themselves. And when children get rejected or children get these messages, the younger they are, the more of an impact it has on them. And these messages stay with them for their whole life. So I just like the way she laid it out for us, that abuse gets the message, I do not like you, so you're unloved, you're not liked, you're not loved. And neglect receives the message, you do not exist. Another thing she says, which is a quote from the book Emerging with Wings, A True Story of Lies, Pain, and the Love That Heals by Danielle Burnock, is trauma is personal. It does not disappear if it is not validated. When it is ignored or invalidated, the silent screams continue internally, heard only by the one held captive. When someone enters the pain and hears the screams, healing can begin. And I just love this quote because it just shows the vital role that foster and adoptive parents play, because that is our job. We're entering into this trauma, we're entering into this pain with these kids and trying to help them. We are not saviors, we are not healers. Only they can do the work in themselves to heal themselves, but they need the support of stable, loving adults. So I just love this quote. And again, it's not from her, it's from a book by Danielle Burnock. I've never read this book, but I think that'll be next on my reading list. But when someone enters the pain and hears the screams, healing can begin. And this just shows how vulnerability and community and stepping into hard and broken places can just really encourage healing in someone else, and the importance of just thinking beyond yourself and in your immediate circle of family and friends and stepping into broken situations. And it might not be foster care or adoption for you, but I think as Christians we're called to step into broken places and to try and help and heal. And I just really love how this quote kind of puts that all together. Another thing she said, I hear this often, is, okay, a child didn't grow up in care, they were removed at birth, and they have a shot at a good life. And yes, they certainly do, more than a child who's experienced abuse and neglect out of the womb. But a child in the womb, when a pregnancy is not, let me just read what she says. A pregnant mother's emotional state affects her baby. If she is under stress, she releases hormones such as cortisol in what's called the metabolic cascade, which affects her immune system and the baby in utero. So drug and alcohol exposure are one thing, but when a mother, say, does not want a child or feels unsafe in her own living situation, or it's just not a healthy environment, they're not doing regular prenatal care, all of those things affect the baby in utero and that's still trauma. Like, just because they haven't been abused or neglected this side of the womb, there's still trauma that happened. And that trauma can have lifelong effects. So I encourage people to think about it differently. Like, I get this a lot. is, you know, because our daughter has been with us since day one, that, you know, she's going to have a great and amazing life and she's not going to be affected by trauma. And part of me wants to believe that, but realistically, I know that there's, you know, I didn't care for her in those 9 months. She wasn't in my womb, and I don't know what kind of trauma. I mean, I know, but I don't share. But I don't know the full extent to the trauma that she received then. But there's a reason she came into foster care, and that trauma may affect her in different ways as she ages and matures. And I don't know what that's going to be like. So it's important for me, even though, yes, I've had her since day one, it's so important for me to be trauma informed, and especially before the womb, how trauma affects children in utero. This is another thing I love that she says, which I've known, but just reading the way she said it. Memories are encoded in brain cells, impacting the child's neurodevelopment. Our bodies keep score. Even though the child has no memory, the brain's neurobiology has stored it. So this is where, like, trauma anniversaries, or the time of year, or, you know, a child got removed from a situation, was put into foster care, that was a very traumatic experience for them. So every time it's, you know, that happened in the middle of the winter. So every time it snows, there are trauma triggers and behaviors that may pop up because our bodies keep score. Even though we can work through healing and try to, you know, move through things and give kids different coping mechanisms, our bodies still keep score. So here's another thing she says in the book. When a child experiences trauma, the amygdala takes over. The amygdala is the emotional part of the brain that deals with survival and protection. When the amygdala is activated, all other areas of the brain are turned off. Children impacted by foster care and adoption are not trying to be defiant. It's a hardware issue in the brain. It's like you're trying to get your child to press the brake when they have the gas pedal pressed to the floor. And I talk to foster parents every single day, and I try and help them through difficult behaviors and give advice. My experience is limited. I only have ever cared for kids under the age of 4. So some of the trauma, you know, in 8, 9, 10-year-olds, teenagers who have experienced trauma for multiple years, it's much harder. And I hear parents trying, how do I deal with this? How do I give them consequences? And I just try to tell, like, you need to connect and love before you correct. There needs to be trust built. There needs to be a relationship. You can't just automatically assume that you are a good parent and you're going to be able to correct these behaviors, because, as Jen says, foot is pressed on the gas pedal, you know, pedal to the metal, and you're trying to tell them to put on the brakes. And that's mixed signals in their brain. The amygdala takes over, and that's dealing with survival and protection. They're in a constant fight or flight. I'm sure you learned that in school. They're in a constant fight or flight stage, and it's hard to work through behaviors when your brain is in survival and protection mode. You're not thinking, you know, often these kids aren't thinking logically, and they have a hard time processing what is the correct way to behave, or, you know, certain behaviors in specific situations. Remember, this is such a great analogy. Their gas pedal is pedal to the metal when you're asking them to put on the brake. And there has to be a balance of how do we get to the middle? How do we deal with getting them to release that gas before we ask them to put on the brake? I hope that makes sense. I read the book. She explains these things so much better than I can. So again, just after she says this, she says we need to view our child's behavior through a trauma lens. So I have this camera lens here. Let's call this trauma. Let's call this a 4-year-old who was abused and neglected their whole life. And we're expecting them to not throw tantrums. We're expecting them to behave well. We're expecting them to be grateful because they're in a loving, safe home now. But we have to view this lens all the time. Remember this trauma, remember this abuse, remember this neglect, and have this in front of our eyes whenever we're trying to parent them or deal with difficult situations. Remember that we have to parent through this trauma lens. So I know that might seem a little hopeless and hard sounding, but she also says a trauma brain can experience healing because of plasticity. Brain plasticity refers to the ability of the brain to change, adapt, and create new neural connections over time with different experiences. Just because a child is struggling right now does not mean a child will struggle in the same way forever. So they saw this in this pride training, like the amount of time a child experienced trauma, double that before you'll be able to get to a point of like true healing beginnings. For example, a baby's in utero for 9 months, trauma for 9 months, going to take 9 months on the other side of the womb of healthy, normal, loving mother, father, child contact, you know, meeting their needs, answering their cries. It's going to take 9 months for that baby to be able to fully trust that somebody's going to be taking care of them and that they don't have to live in fight or flight. So can you imagine a child that's experienced that for 5 years, 10 years? Like a 10-year-old who has experienced trauma, it's going to take another 10 years before they really have the capability to get their foot off that gas pedal all of the time. And sure, those next 10 years aren't going to be like that all of the time. And there's going to be great moments and moments of just excitement because they're overcoming things. But when in stress, they're automatically going to go back to that gas pedal, floor down, pedal to the metal. And we have to remember that it takes time. Healing takes time, but it can happen because we have brain plasticity. I mean, our brains are just crazy what they can do, but it does take time and a lot of patience. So another thing she says in the book, which I think every foster parent needs to hear, is research shows that consequence and punitive-oriented approaches to discipline may keep child functioning in their trauma brain and not bring them to the healing they need. So you're trying to, I know bedwetting is a common one. Like, you have an older child who's still bedwetting or even having accidents during the day or tantrums and really difficult behaviors, and just being defiant, like things like that. We try to give them consequences or take things away. That doesn't work for a trauma brain. Again, remember, we need to connect before we correct. We need to build trust. We need to come at it from a place of love. It doesn't work. Does that work for my biological children? Taking something away from them, or, they lose a privilege or whatever it may be. Does that work? Yes, because they don't have a trauma brain. They've been parented very differently from day one. So those kind of things can work. Consequence type discipline can work for kids who haven't experienced trauma, but it doesn't work for kids who experience trauma. And I'm not saying it never will, but that connection needs to be made before you can jump into consequences for discipline. She says, which I love, loving vulnerable children as Jesus commanded means to love with our time, energy, actions, and resources. So as foster and adoptive parents, it's hard, and trauma parenting can really wear you down sometimes. But this is the way Jesus commanded us to love. It's not just loving and parenting them. It's our time. It's our resources. It's making sure that we go above and beyond and get the training necessary in order to parent them well. It's not just bringing a kid into your home and feeding them meals and giving them a routine and putting them to bed at a regular time. There's so much more involved, and Jesus calls us to this kind of love. So when a child requires more, we need to require more of ourselves. We need to do more. Another thing she says, God is 100% about working for justice for the needy and oppressed. And if we want to be in line with God's heart, we need to be about justice as well. The value of faithfulness is a good model for us as we enter in adoption and foster care. Sometimes just surviving is a struggle, with the feeling that things will never improve. But just as God is faithful towards us, we have the opportunity to practice faithfulness towards the beautiful children who are in our care by sticking with them through the ups and downs and loving them sacrificially. Being a foster parent, being an adoptive parent to a child from a hard place, that is sacrifice, but we are called to love them sacrificially. So it's not going to be easy. So don't go into it thinking it's going to be easy. Go into it knowing that there is going to be a lot of sacrifices that need to be made. For example, my daughter just finally started sleeping through the night at 2. That's been a sacrifice for my sleep. For the past 2 years, I haven't had a full night's sleep. Well, longer than that, ever since we started fostering, basically. But that's one of the areas that trauma has impacted her, is she has a hard time falling asleep, staying in sleep cycles. And trust me, I've done all the reading and all the research and everything to get her to sleep through the night. And it just took time. It took time, and it took her knowing that I'm going to come to her when she cries out. And it took time. And that was a sacrifice for me. And some people can be like, oh, I just can't function on this no sleep, and they remove the child from their home. Like, you can't go into it thinking that way. Like, you don't have that option as a foster parent. Know that you're going into this and you're going to have to make a lot of sacrifices. Another thing she says, which kind of goes along the lines of what I just said, because vulnerable children's needs are so great and the desire to love and care for children is so deep, we can feel emotionally compelled to take action, sometimes letting wisdom and discernment take a back seat. Foster care and adoption is never something you should jump into. And I know I talk on my channel that I believe Christians and more people are called to be involved in this and should be involved in this, but that does not mean that everybody should be a foster and adoptive parent. But I believe everybody, as Christians, I believe we are all called to care for vulnerable and orphan children in one way or another. And it's not only being on the front lines and opening your home to them. There's many other ways to support, but these kids are innocent. These kids are vulnerable, and as stable Christian adults, we are called to care for them. But there definitely takes a lot of wisdom and discernment going into the process, so do never jump into it. She says negative consequences occur when families rush headlong into adoption or foster care in a way that is not wise, balanced, or disciplined. Families struggle, marriages break up, placements fail, and kids return to the foster system. And the more moves that kids have, the more trauma it has and the more impact it has on them and the more healing that they need to do. So don't just jump into foster care because you feel emotionally compelled. You need to do a lot of research. You need to get a lot of training, talk to people, gain wisdom from people who have done it. And that's a part of why I share it on my channel, is I'm trying to encourage and inspire other foster parents. Yes, you can do hard things, and I believe you can choose well and choose love. But I believe there's a lot of training that you need to do, and you shouldn't jump into it blindly, and you should put as much effort into the preparing process as possible. Another thing she says, which is a really common thing, put your oxygen mask on first before helping others. This is what they say on the plane. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And I know often I struggled with this as a Christian. Give, give, give. Like God calls me to die to myself. Help others, give more. But if you are not pouring into yourself first, I'm not saying a selfish love, but a needed love and a needed self-care and a needed soul care. If you're not pouring into yourself first, it's like the blind leading the blind, for the lack of a better term. You cannot pour into these kids if your cup is empty, your bucket is empty. So put on your oxygen mask first. Get the help that you need first. Therapy for foster and adoptive parents is a very common thing. It's not something to be ashamed of if you need. It's something to be celebrated, that you're recognizing that you need that help. So put on your oxygen mask first. Another thing she says, I just have two more, I know this video is getting long, but speak to your kids about foster care the way you hope they will think about foster care, because they're listening. And live out foster care the way you hope they'll live out foster care, because they are watching. If you have biological children in the home, you have to be careful about how you word things. It's easy to get caught up in, the situations that the kids came from. And, something I say to my kids is it's hard to be a parent. It is really hard to be a parent, and not everybody can do it. And because you have a good mommy and daddy, and a mommy and daddy who love you and know how to parent well, that we're called to help other kids that maybe don't have that. My kids see me sacrificing, and they sacrifice, and they've had to sacrifice a lot. And, sometimes I get comments that that's not fair to my biological children, but I've said this in other videos, the compassion that they have, the willingness to help others, the love that they have for others because of what they've seen my husband and I model with our foster children, and the way we talk about foster care, it shows in them, and they're very emotionally mature. They have broken hearts for vulnerable kids because they've seen that in us. So just remember, the way you talk and the way you act and the way you live out foster care, our kids are watching, our kids are listening. The last little nugget of wisdom I'm going to share is we aren't promised an easy journey. We are promised that the God who has overcome the world will be with us every step of the way. And honestly, there's sometimes in your foster and adoption journey that you're going to feel hopeless, and you're going to feel like, I can't do this, and this child needs to move, or I need, it's going to feel hard, and it's going to feel hopeless. But God is faithful, and God is going to be with us through this journey. So lean into Him. That has been the most important thing for me in this fostering journey, is when I'm feeling down, and just surrender it to Him, and He will help you. I could go on and on with the nuggets of wisdom from this book. She talks about everything from creating a support circle to dealing with difficult behaviors and everything else in between that foster care and adoption entails. And also there's a section in this book for those who want to support, who can't maybe necessarily be an adoptive parent or be a foster parent, but who want to support those that do. There's a whole section in this book for those. So it's not just for foster and adoptive families, but for those who want to support the cause as well. So in a nutshell, this book talks about the 3 areas of support that foster and adoptive parents need, and how to implement systems and practices into your life to thrive in the role that God has called you to. She's talking about informational support, trauma-informed parenting, learning about attachment, learning about sensory needs, learning about the different diagnoses that often come with kids that are in foster care and have experienced trauma. She talks about tangible support, financial support, babysitting, bringing meals, you know, ways that other people can come alongside you as a foster and adoptive family. And then emotional and spiritual support. Now, it's super important to be connected with people who get it, both adults and children. It's important for your biological kids, your foster kids, to be connected with kids that are in similar situations. And of course, connecting to God and just leaning into Him and asking Him for help on this. It's not easy. I will never tell you foster parenting is easy, but I always say it's worth it. And God, leaning into God and asking for God's help, and God is faithful. He will help you and He will make it easier. And I also really love how she discusses the role of the church in this. And, you know, it's inspired me as an individual to do more. I was kind of inspired at the last conference, like because my church doesn't have any physical program for foster and adoptive families, or like, how can my church do more? And, you know, I go to a very large church, and it's easy to complain that your church doesn't do something. But if you're going to be complaining about it, you need to be willing to step up and do it. Because we plan on moving and we're not sure if we'll be at that church forever, I was kind of reluctant to start something. And since I attended the Replanted conference last October, it was called the Refresh conference then. It's officially called the Replanted conference now. But I have just kind of been praying about somebody to come alongside me, and that person has come into my life, and we are going to be starting a foster care and adoptive support group, an initiative within our church, so that our church can do more to be involved to support these families. And, you know, reading her book recently, yes, that spark was kind of put in my heart when I attended the conference, but reading this book has just really put me on fire. Like, our church needs to be doing more, and because I feel that way, I need to be the one that steps up and does it. So like I said earlier, they run support groups, and they will help you to implement a support group within the ministry. So you can go to replantedministry.org and get more connected and involved that way. But it's a fabulous book. Any foster or adoptive parent of faith needs to read it, or to be, as a church, to be involved. Any person of faith that cares about vulnerable children. I think it's an amazing book to read. I highly recommend it. I think Jenn did an amazing job with it. So check it out for sure. I know this is a long video, but I just wanted to give you a really in-depth look at what she covers in the book. And I mean, there's so much more than what I actually said in this video. So this book is a fabulous resource for all foster parents of faith. I do have another resource called the Foster Coaster course. It's a course on how to serve, cope, and thrive as a foster parent, and I've poured my heart and soul into it. You can access it from the link down below if that's something you're interested. I remember being a new foster parent and just wanting, or in the fostering process, going through the training and just wanting to know all of the things. And I get messages from you guys all of the time wanting to know all of the things. So I have put all of the things into a course format. You can listen to it on audio. There's a workbook in there as well, which I should mention. There's also questions and like workbook type questions in the Replanted book. But there's a workbook in there as well, just to help you sort through emotions, feelings, record things about the kids in your care. It's a really packed course, kind of broken down in bite-sized informations that cover all the aspects of foster care that I have experienced with through just learning and knowledge and courses and conferences I've gone to, as well as just my experience of being a foster parent for the past 4 years. So if you're interested in that and you want to know more, you can definitely get that down below. I will also leave a link to Jenn's book down below. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If it was helpful, I would love if you would give it a thumbs up. It helps other like-minded mamas to find the channel. Again, if you're new here, I'd love for you to subscribe. I would appreciate that so much, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.
Such a wonderful delight.